Morning all. After having shown you the Immortal draw yesterday, it would be nice, I thought, to logically follow on to show you the Immortal losing game. This game was played between Bogdan Sliwa and David Bronstein. So Bogdan Sliwa was a Polish chess master who lived between 1922 and 2003. He won the championship of Poland 6 times. In 1946, he won the first Polish championship after World War II. In 1948, he took third in Krakow. He won the Polish championship 4 consecutive times in 1951 to 1954. So a very, very strong player. However, one of his most famous games is this one that I'd like to show you, and it was called the Immortal losing game. So his opponent, the mighty David Bronstein, which many of you will know, but just in case, David Bronstein was arguably one of the strongest and most imaginative players to emerge from the talent-rich Soviet Union. Moscow champion 5 times. Shared first place in 1961 with Shamkovich. He twice shared the USSR championship. In 1948 with Alexander Kotov. In 1949 with Vasily Smyslov. In 1950 he won the Budapest candidates, which earned him a world championship match against Mikhail Botvinnik. And after 22 games, Bronstein led the match and just needed 1 point from the last 2 games to win the title. However, Botvinnik won the 23rd game and held the draw in the final game to tie the match and retain the crown. So anyway, d4 from Bogdan. Okay, the Immortal losing game. So it's kind of taking the mickey out of the Immortal game, which is, there's one Immortal game called the Immortal game, which is between Adolf Anderssen and Leonel Kazertsky. So we're going to see here a very interesting game where one side does start to have a dodgy position and sets a series of rather elegant traps. Okay, so g3 from Bogdan, and David replies with g6 here, David Bronstein. So maybe, knight f6, there might be bishop g5, so he's not moving this knight. Maybe this is an interesting continuation, and it would usually transpose into a Leningrad Dutch if white played c4 later. So we see both sides fianchettoing the bishops, but now instead of c4 we see knight c3, which implies white is interested in playing e4. Black tries to stop that for a moment with knight f6, and now we see bishop g5. And here there's no knight e4 possibility, so this is quite annoying, and white can follow up perhaps with queen d2. So here actually David Bronstein plays knight c6. He doesn't mind, I think, d5 here, because his knight can always come like this, maybe to attack this bishop. That would safeguard the h6 square as well. But white plays now queen d2. Also e4 is discouraged, of course, because of taking, and the d4 pawn's slightly loose. So queen d2, d6. White now plays h4. And now, okay, black actually doesn't go for e5 here. e5 here might not be that good. White could possibly just take here, because there's a horrible bishop takes c6 potentially, or just taking on d8 and then taking, and then knight d5 could be annoying. So he doesn't want to play into this continuation. Or knight d5 here is very nice for white. In fact, this is a very nice position. But after knight takes d8, again white can secure an advantage and actually win a pawn by force, it seems. So black is not keen for e5. He actually plays e6. We've seen this kind of move before in Leningrad Duchess. So just to discourage d5 a little bit, and without, because otherwise white's sealing that with an en passant idea later. If white gets in d5 without black pawn being on e6, this can be a good lock on the e6 square. So this e6, and white castles queenside. h6 kicking the bishop goes back to f4. Okay, and now we see bishop d7, and then let's move e4. David takes this, knight takes e4, and this can be a slightly double-edged move, this next move, if it's not followed up correctly. Knight d5. So it's hitting d4, it's also hitting the bishop on f4. White protects the d4 pawn, and here black, David Bronstein actually plays in this position the move queen e7 here. Let's just quickly see. Instead of queen e7, is knight takes f4 slightly dangerous? It probably is in this position quite dangerous, because how is g6 defended? If we play knight e7, it looks to be getting quite unpleasant, and actually there's a nice target here on e6. So this is potentially a very unpleasant position here indeed, especially with this d5 possibility that could cement a knight as well on e6. So okay, so this queen e7 makes things a bit securer for actually the g6 pawn, because potentially there's things like queen f7 then to protect g6. Now this knight is kicked with c4, and it's here that actually this is a much better version of knight takes f4 than what we've just witnessed. If knight takes f4 here, knight takes f4, we've got the resource queen f7 here to protect g6, and this might not be too bad. For example, d5 we could take, and here we could actually castle tactically, because for example knight g6 we've got bishop e6 winning material, even if there's a pin there. Actually queen takes c4 check here is very, very nice. So this continuation is to be avoided for white. This is great for black, this continuation, and that's pretty nasty for white. So actually here's the dubious move of the game. David Bronstein played knight b6 when queen e7 does seem to make knight takes f4 playable, but anyway, so knight b6, and it allows white to pierce black's pawn chain with tempo again. So c5, and this bishop striking heavily on this diagonal. c7 and d6 are loose. Black now faces a very difficult decision indeed. Possibly a lesser evil move in knight c4, and we could see this kind of continuation. And here, I mean, it's still a very, very unpleasant situation. This kind of thing. But maybe e5 here, and maybe minimizing the disadvantage a little bit. Actually, white has positioning stronger than taking on c4 though. Bishop e3 here, so that e5 can be answered with d5. Okay, so anyway, after c5, actually knight c4 wasn't played. David played d takes c5, but both are quite unpleasant anyway. So d takes c5, but bishop takes c7 now immediately threatens knight d6, which is pretty nasty. So black decides to castle and just lose the exchange here, with bishop d6 skewing the queen and rook. And you might think, well, why am I showing you this game, the Immortal losing game? Why is it a famous game? I think one thing about chess, when we compare human chess to computer chess, computers always try and play the best moves, and usually we consider that we should be trying to play the best moves generally. Okay, sometimes on quicker time controls you can play more for trappy chess, you can play more optimistic chess, but this optimism is part of the human difference, the difference between humans and computers. Sometimes we're in a lost position in our club games, and we recognise that, and you can either carry on with a kind of lesser evil move strategies, try and play the best moves and cling on, or you can start gambling and set traps, and we're going to see the latter here, gambling and setting traps. So we're losing the exchange here. Okay, so how can black possibly set any traps here? Okay, queen f7, needed to get away from that. Bishop takes f8, rook takes f8. So from an engine perspective, we're down -3 here, about three units. D takes c5. We've got a shield d7 here now. So knight d5 from the glare of the queen and rook there. That was on d7. f4, and it's pretty nasty position. Rook d8 is played. And now knight 2 to c3, blasting away at this d file. David Bronstein now plays knight db4, and we see knight d6 attacking the queen. The queen actually now steps back to f8, and this looks like a total disaster scenario now. And now from an engine point of view, at move 22 we've gone to +7, believe it or not. It's +7. Okay. But this is why this game is interesting, because do we resign as humans? You know, we're not computers. We don't say -7, if -7, resign. Thanks very much. No, sometimes we set traps. And here, okay, how does black possibly set any traps? Well, his move here is virtually forced actually to be the best move anyway, because if he moves the rook, d7 is just dropping off without any compensation. Really, there's no real trap here. For example, bishop takes c3, I think is fairly harmless. Possibly strongest is taking on here first, and then taking, and there's no danger with even knight a2 because the queen's protecting a2. This kind of thing is pretty nasty. So, okay, I think this move is one of the best in the circumstances now, to play knight d4. So losing the rook, okay, which is munched. But now here, interestingly, the move played here, from an engine point of view, is not really coming into things, and this is where we, you know, as humans, we set traps, and computers still trying to play the best move because that's what they're programmed to do. So from a computer point of view, queen takes c5 might actually contain some threats as well, but queen takes d8 is fairly miserable after knight e2. There's nothing really pointing at white's king. Resources of black have gone. So if you have a look at this position, you know, black hasn't got really any promising traps, so, or pressure at all against the white king. So let's go back to this knight takes d8. David Bronstein actually played bishop b5. So what are the implied traps here? Well, these arrows might give it away. If knight takes b5, then actually there's still no real trap to fall into here, because check, king b1 and big deal. But queen f5 starts to look a little bit more dangerous, with the idea of knight takes a2 mate. But this still can be parried here. It's just what if knight takes b5. Okay, if black was given a move here, then the threat is actually, for example, knight takes a2 is potentially a threat, or queen f5, or bishop d3, and then knight takes a2 is actually makes knight takes a2 as a resource much more effective. So the idea is to really get the bishop to d3 ideally, because at the moment knight takes a2, there's king b1. So getting the bishop to d3 sets the scene for some interesting traps. So white plays here knight takes e6, attacking the queen, and here this trap is set now. Bishop d3 is played, offering the queen. Now Bogdan Sliwa is a very, very good player. It will be pretty unfortunate if he did take the queen off here. Knight takes a2, and then we have knight b3, and it will be mate. So that is a terrible thing to do, to take the queen. But no, after bishop d3, a very strong move was played, reinforcing white's position and threatening also black's king as well, bishop d5. Okay, so what can black do here? If he takes on d5, now taking the queen is perfectly safe, in fact. So white has safeguarded some critical squares. David Bronstein now plays queen f5, and again now there's definitely a threat here of not knight takes a2 and knight b3 because the bishop's covering it, but queen takes d5 first is actually one key threat, so that after knight takes we have knight takes mate. So just trying to undermine a2 here. So white plays here knight takes d4, and it's discovered check. And here, white is inviting this queen takes d5. So again, if white goes wrong, this would be really embarrassing. Knight takes d5, knight takes a2 is checkmate. So what does white do here? Well, he puts an end to black's fun here with knight c2. Or does he? Black tries now bishop takes c3, so that if queen takes c3 we have knight takes a2 and black's actually winning the queen. Unfortunately, queen takes c3 is not forced. White can play b takes c3. After queen takes a2, this sets the final naughty trap. If white is tempted to play knight takes b4, then queen b1 is checkmate, or in fact queen a1 will do as well as checkmate. But unfortunately the optimism is drained from black after c takes b4. The knight covers the key checking squares. Oh dear. Well, David Bronstein gave it a shot anyway. And there we have it. David Bronstein resigned here finally, presumably with a cheeky smile on his face. And okay, you might be very confused why I've shown you this game. It's just a famous game, one of the most famous of Bogdan Sliwa, who you may never have heard of before. So the Immortal losing game, I think it does show that it's kind of taking some of the fun out of the Immortal games in general, because in some of the Immortal games there were more accurate defences, so you could say there's an element of optimism in all the brilliant games we see as Immortal games. There's sometimes an element of optimism. Sometimes the opponents didn't need to help the opponent create the Immortal. So this game kind of is a caricature of that, saying, this is a way, okay, it didn't work out, but you can see all the traps that were set. I know that some people regard the high quality Immortals as where there was no defense, obviously, but you do get a lot of brilliant games where the opponent might have helped a little bit with blunders. So this is just showing human optimism from a losing position to be able to set traps rather than just sit and die. Because when you're playing against another human, you know, there's always a chance, and that's what makes the game a lot of fun, to have chances all the time for the opponent to blunder. So I think that's why this game is considered quite special and interesting, and called the Immortal losing game. I hope you enjoyed it. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.